to Communicate Like a Leader, today sponsored by the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County. My name is Anna Manzano, and I'm the Digital Media and Event Strategist here at the California Employers Association. Before we officially begin today's webinar, I have just a couple details to go over with you. So as you see, your audio will be muted for today's presentation, but there will be lots of opportunities to engage during the session. You're already doing so beautifully in the chat here. If you have any questions, though, pertaining to the presentation content, you can type them into the Q&A box at any time, and we'll try to address them as we go. I will be helping here in the chat and helping Keisha manage the Q&A to make sure that you get all of your questions answered today. Handouts for this training, those were sent out in yesterday's reminder email. I know that we had a couple last-minute registrations late yesterday and this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the PDF into the chat shortly just to make sure everyone has it and you can follow along. And last but not least, we do have a survey. So because your feedback is incredibly important to us, we have a little survey that will pop up the QR code at the end. You'll also have possibly a browser window that'll pop up with a prompt to click through. But the 5 questions that you answer, it takes less than 2 minutes, but the feedback that you provide to us, we at CEA, and we share that with we share the feedback with our friends at Ventura County. We all use that information to make sure that we're providing you with the best resources possible. So if you could take a minute to complete the survey at the end, we would greatly appreciate it. And speaking of resources, today's training, again, is sponsored by our partners at the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County. And today we are glad to have Rebecca Tafoya, who is one of the business solutions specialists, to share more about the resources available to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for the warm welcome. Once again, my name is Rebecca Tafoya. I'm a business solutions specialist with the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I just wanted to introduce our complimentary human resources no-cost hotline for employers. It's available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and it basically gives all the information regarding hiring practices, human resources, and so forth. If you have any questions regarding to hiring and firing processes, paid sick leave laws, breaks, lunch, overtime, you can call the number and somebody will answer live and answer any questions you have. If you have any other businesses that you'd like to share this with, feel free. We'd like to get the word out there as much as possible. My name is Rebecca, and I'll go ahead and I'll drop all my information in the chat. If you have any questions and so forth, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. And Cynthia is also on today, and the entire Workforce Development Board team from Ventura for sponsoring today and gathering all these awesome people. Now I have the privilege of introducing our trainer today. We have Keisha Hansen, who is our Learning and Development Director here at CEA. And I know we have a lot to cover, and it's a great presentation. So Keisha, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Rebecca. And good morning, everyone in Ventura County. Hopefully you're staying dry. And as Anna referred to, hopefully it doesn't feel like a Monday to you. If you did have yesterday off, I know Mondays can be a little hard, but we really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedules to attend these webinars that we are so privileged to partner with the Workforce Development Board of Ventura on. If you are joining us for the very first time, just very briefly about California Employers Association, we are a human resource association. We are based in Sacramento, but we serve members, our employers, throughout the whole state of California and increasingly even outside California who may have employees or locations in California as well. Our goal is really to provide our employers peace of mind through our human resource compliance solutions, trainings such as we're doing today. We do executive coaching and recruiting services as well. So if you need more information on us, or something clicked in your brain that you need some information on, again, you have that 800 number that is exclusively for Ventura County in your handouts that you can give us a call Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 at no charge to you. So it's a great resource that is being provided to you by Ventura County Workforce Development Board. Also, we want to give our lawyers peace of mind by letting you know that I am not a lawyer. And we do a lot of compliance presentations. This one isn't as much compliance, but we just want you to know, if you do need to consult an attorney about any issues, we do partner with several law firms across the state of California. So again, you can use that 800 number and give us a call, and hopefully we can partner you with someone in your area. So hopefully you've come here for a reason. Something clicked when you saw the presentation on Communicate Like a Leader. Perhaps you're a seasoned leader that has experienced a lot of change in the last few years, and who hasn't? Maybe you're a brand new manager or leader and wanting to learn how to be more effective in your communications. In the limited time that we have today with such a broad subject, we're going to try and focus on what are some of the challenges for you. And as Anna said, you have a chance, even though we can't see each other, you have a chance to participate in the chat. I might ask some strategic questions, but feel free to ask questions and also share your wisdom and knowledge on some of these areas. But we're going to focus on some challenges that you may be facing as leaders with your communication in today's workforce, and maybe touch on some best practices, learning what people's different communication styles are, and of course, how do we deal with all the evolution of technology and make it be effective communication. So let's see if we can get that done in an hour. And our goal is always that you take away at least one thing new, or maybe it was a reminder, either from me, through the slides, or even from your colleagues and peers that are here today that are sharing their own wealth and knowledge about the workforce. So this probably doesn't come as a surprise, but studies have shown that over 70% of mistakes in the workplace are a direct result of poor communication. And when you think about it, everything we do in the workplace revolves around communication in some form. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It's really hard to imagine a whole day where we don't connect with someone when it comes to communication, whether it's emails, texts, phone calls. But keeping in mind that how we communicate influences everything. It influences our employees that we manage and oversee. It influences the culture. It influences whether we are productive or not. It really has a huge impact on the workplace and for our own selves, our own level of personal well-being as well. So these tips and tools are not only good for the workplace, but also in our personal lives. And when you think about it, communication is so central to every job that it really continually lists the top of what recruiters and employers look for when hiring. I have been a recruiter for a lot of our members at CEA, and they always want people who are effective communicators. So it is really integral. When we have that miscommunication that's listed, that 70%, and you can probably think of moments when there was miscommunication that maybe caused a breakdown, something failed to happen, or you weren't productive as a result. It really can cause that domino effect. It can cause stress and frustration amongst the team. It can cause poor decision making. It can cause reduced productivity, absenteeism, high turnover, people looking for other jobs, low morale, and just reduced innovation. So you might have all the intelligence in the world, but it won't help you if you can't get your message across. And that's the one thing when we talk about communication, we have to keep in mind, what is the purpose of communication? It's really for the responsibility of the communicator to not only have your message received, but understood. And I would gather in our rapidly paced work environment that a lot of times we just focus on getting that message out, especially when we default to email. And we don't focus as much as, is that message being received and is that message being understood? So that's one of the responsibilities that we have to keep in mind as we are all communicators. So here's our first opportunity for you to be interactive. So as I said, you had a reason for coming here today. As you think about what are some of the specific challenges, at least one, that you face with communication, what is it that's keeping you from being an effective leader, or what are you finding in the workplace that is challenging that might not have been there before? So feel free to put it in the chat. We want this to be interactive. We want to hear from you so that maybe we can touch on some of those areas. What are some of the things facing you that maybe didn't exist 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or maybe it's something ongoing, but you're just being presented with it today? Don't be shy. Again, this is kind of our default now. We communicate via instant messaging. We communicate via email. Okay, great one. Well, this is going to maybe be a popular one. Leading a team that is all remote. And we certainly have had a lot of employers have had to address that and maybe didn't have that experience of managing a remote team previously to the pandemic, but we're somewhat forced to have a remote workforce afterwards or during as well. Face-to-face barriers to working. Yes. Here's another one, limited time to communicate, too many meetings. Oh my gosh, we're going to touch on that, Sabrina. Yes, they actually say as a result of the pandemic that we have more meetings than ever before. Yeah, so we want to be strategic about how many meetings we had. And we actually we were in a training the other day with was regarding stress and managing stress and burnout. And there was a person who was attending the training. She was actually on her smartphone and she was in another facility delivering cookies to a senior center while she was attending our training. And she said she had 5 additional meetings booked that day, virtual. So we need to be a little bit more strategic because, again, that can also lead to some additional stress and burnout. And is it effective to have all of those meetings? Letter of policies, causing red tape, interfering with client centers. So yeah, lots of issues. How do you mediate between implementing and following policies and really servicing your clients? Yeah, that's a tricky one too. Yes, good. All right, you're getting the hang of it in terms of responding. So, okay. So for some reason, here we go. Okay. So some of the challenges that we've seen, you've already said, when it comes to leaders and communication challenges, one of the ones reported, and this was an article that came out a couple of years ago from Forbes. Number one was work overload, right? As leaders, we are being led in so many different directions. And so we aren't really being strategic with how we communicate with our teams. Are we implementing a weekly staff meeting? Do we need a daily check-in with people? Because it becomes so overwhelming. And this isn't really the topic of today's session, but we find when we're talking to managers that they really have a hard time in delegating, and that results in some of that work overload, right? And some of that hesitation has to do with not having built that trust and not having been able to determine what are the strengths that some of my employees are demonstrating so they can take on some of the assignments and some of that work so that I can be more strategic, so I can carve out more time to have that communication with my employees and be able to give them the critical feedback that they need. Another one was lack of transparency, and we had so much change that happened during the pandemic, right? We had so many changes, whether it was people going remote to changing different softwares to adapting to the technology that everybody was using. And sometimes, this is related down below, is leadership and managers didn't really explain the why. Why is this happening? And every employee wants to know the why as much as possible, as much as information as you can give, right? Because it's what's in it for me. How is this going to impact me when this decision is made, when this change is made? And when we give that information, when we provide that information and we say, this is why we're making this change, this is why this decision has been made, you get a little bit more buy-in with your employees when they say, gosh, at least that was shared with me, how they came to this decision. Maybe we had the input, maybe we surveyed employees, and we were able to make some decisions based on that. But research has shown when employees are given the opportunity to share some ideas and input ahead of the decision-making process, they have more buy-in when the ultimate decision is made. So as much as we can, there maybe not everything can be revealed at certain times, but being as transparent and communicating the why is so important. And we're seeing the opposite of that showing up in the media with the layoffs that are happening with these larger companies, right? Where they're not telling the employees why they're being laid off, or the manager isn't even sitting in. If you go to social media, you can see some of that happening where the employees actually recorded the meeting. Another one, and this is a huge one, and in one actual survey that, again, Forbes did during the pandemic, when people were reconsidering their jobs during the Great Resignation, they're saying, gosh, during the pandemic, has my employer really been looking out for me? Have they really supported me? And some of the answers were no. When they did a survey asking employees what would make them stay, one of the main reasons, and it had 92% of responders said, I would stay if my manager showed more empathy, right? So that's a really big one. And, we also know, working with multiple hundreds of employers over the years at CEA, that a lot of managers are promoted because they did well in their previous position, not necessarily because they already possessed the critical interpersonal skills that they need in order to oversee people, right? So empathy is a big one, and it's not everybody's strength. It's not everybody's superpower. For me, it tends to be one of my top strengths, if you've ever taken the Strength Finders assessment. But for some people, it's a little bit of a challenge. But knowing that people, again, want a manager and a leader who shows they care, especially during difficult times, as was demonstrated during the pandemic. We want to know that our leaders support us, that they have our back, and they care about us, not only in our work environment, but what's happened to us in our personal environment. That's not to say we're nosy or we're going to invade someone's privacy, but sharing that empathy. If an employee is sharing that they do have a work overload, showing that we care, showing that we support them, and how can we help resolve that issue with them. Another one, and this is really interesting, is not communicating enough. And leaders and managers and supervisors tend to think they communicate all the time, right? Oh my gosh, I send a million emails. I go to all these different meetings. But again, remember what the goal of communicating is. It's not just to send out the message. It's making sure that the message is received. And most employees who respond to this say their leaders don't communicate enough. So again, how do we strategize this so we're not having 100 meetings a day, but we're really being effective with the communication when we do have meetings, when we do have one-on-ones with our employees, so that they do feel that we're communicating and that they feel heard and listened to and valued. And then the final one in here is making assumptions, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but not everybody communicates the way we do, right? Not everybody has the same style. So assuming that email is the way someone wants to be communicated with might not be the way they prefer to be communicated with. So it starts with kind of meeting people where they are and finding out what works for them. And even simply asking, what's the best way to communicate with you? How am I going to get a hold of you? Is it going to be through email? Is it going to be through phone? Is it going to be setting up a Zoom call and making that work? And really, if you look at this statement, it is not a soft skill to have communication, especially as a leader. It is a critical skill. And as we mentioned, it has so much impact on our work environment. So as I said, we've worked with hundreds of employers throughout the state of California at CEA and had the opportunity to train and help guide them with making critical decisions. One of the additional barriers that we found with communication is, again, recognizing that we're all different. To put it simply, we're all different. We all grew up differently, and our accumulated experiences, our different educations, our different life ways, who our parents were, who our friends were, the communities we grew up with, really shape who we are. And that predisposes all of us to think and act differently. So again, we'll mention in a minute about the different generations. But if you think of, what was available back in the seniors, our grandparents, our parents' generations, and what's available now in terms of models of communication and how we communicate, there could be opportunities there for some barriers, right? So thinking, okay, I have to meet this person where they are, and I have to adapt to different people's perspectives and ways of thinking. Another barrier is not sharing the same meaning in the words we use. And as I mentioned, we have multiple generations, so there could be different terms that we use in different generations that other generations either haven't heard or they're interpreting differently. There could be regional differences. We have a huge country in the United States. There could be cultural differences, not being from the United States. It could be just based on different industries, right? Different industries have different terminologies. And boy, do we like to use acronyms in California, in the United States, in the workforce. So you can have different acronyms. So again, it's making sure that you're being clear and concise and making sure that people are going to interpret what you're communicating. And I'll give you an example of this. So it is raining in Southern California. I'm down in Orange County. It might be raining where you are. So I'm like, well, let's take a trip. Let's leave this cloudy, rainy place today and let's go somewhere sunny, shiny. Let's go to Hawaii. So everybody on board, everybody want to come? Everybody in the mood to seek sunnier grounds, drier grounds? Hopefully, it might be raining in Hawaii. Anyways, we're going. So all I ask of you is that you arrive to the airport on time. Make sure that you're going to be on time. So what does that mean to you? When I say be on time at the airport, put it in the chat. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm raring to go. What does that mean to you to be on time at the airport? And put it in the chat. Because I guarantee you it's going to mean something different for everybody. Or what more information do you need? Was that clear to you? For me to just say, hey, we're going to Hawaii, be to the airport on time. So a couple of you are saying 2 hours before, 1 hour before, 10 minutes before the plane leaves. Oh my gosh. Couple hours. Yeah, someone needs clarification. What time are we leaving so that I can make sure that I'm there enough? You might even ask, what airport are we leaving from, Keisha? Because John Wayne Airport might be a little less hectic than LAX, right? I try to avoid LAX as much as possible, and there are flights to Hawaii. So it depends on the airport, it depends, but most of this is based on our previous experience, right? So we have to be really clear and just think of one of the most common ways that we communicate with our teams, especially as you mentioned, maybe being remote from each other, is we default to email, right? So when we're communicating something really important and we want to get that message across, we want to be really clear and concise in how we're communicating. So we don't want people to have to make assumptions based on our email, right? Or have that ping pong back and forth. Well, what time did you mean? Well, what airport are we going to? We want to put it as much clear information in that email, if it is email, or any other mode of communication as we can. So yes, so I will make it clear. We will be going to John Wayne and the flight leaves at 4. So let's get there at 2. I'll see you there. So another barrier to communication, I wouldn't say barrier, but it is a challenge for some of the employers in our work environments today, is the multiple generations that we have working. And one survey said 81% of workers say the primary difference between workers is communication styles. And this is just an example on this infographic of what was available to each generation at the time that they started working, right? So our oldest generation, believe it or not, known as the maturists, also known as seniors, are still in the workplace. They're only about 2%, right? But you might have some business owners, that are still maintaining their own businesses. You might still have people who just want to continue to work. So we have 5 generations, and just to see on the infographic what has evolved in that time, right? Since the time of the maturists to the seniors to the days of now the Generation Z being in the workforce, a lot has changed, a lot has evolved. And that might influence the way we prefer to communicate, right? And that's not to say that we don't want to adapt to the new technology that is out there, especially if we're going to utilize it, right? We should all be familiar with Zoom now, with instant messaging, with using Slack or team meetings. But we have seen that hasn't always been the case, right? People are comfortable with what they've used in the past, and other people are comfortable with what they've grown up with, right? So it's finding that medium. And again, for those employers who were kind of forced into that remote situation and maybe forced to adapt to new technologies, they didn't necessarily set a protocol for what communications to use. So we would have employers calling us and say, gosh, Anna's working from home today, but I don't even know if she's working because I don't see her. I can't, have a conversation with her. She's not answering her email. So it's setting up that code of conduct for the different technologies, the different platforms. There may be somebody on your team who just prefers using email because it's accessible to them, and they're there at their desk all day. They can answer questions easily. But you may have employees who are front of the line employees who don't have access to their emails all day. So you might have to adjust that communication and set up an in-person meeting or a Zoom meeting when it's appropriate. So a lot of employers have gone back and kind of reevaluated, well, gosh, we need to set some parameters for what modes of communication we're going to use and when it's going to be best. And also, when do we expect those response times, right? If I do have an employee working remotely and I send an email, what are my expectations for them to respond to me? And at CEA, it's within 2 hours if we get a call from a member and we're on another call. We have a 2-hour window, I believe. Anna can correct me if I'm wrong. So we know what the expectations are of when I'm supposed to call that person back who has a question regarding their HR issues, right? So maybe it's just putting in some boundaries, some parameters. That goes again for also meetings. When are we having meetings? Does anybody want to go to a meeting at 8 a.m. on Monday or 4 p.m. on Friday? Maybe we need to adjust that because we're going to get the best out of our employees when we have that. So also the other thing about multi-generations that's coming up that I just want to touch on, and we do have a training based on that, but it's utilizing the mentorship of all that knowledge, that wealth of knowledge that exists. If you do have multiple generations on your team, I worked in a retail environment years ago where my oldest employee was 78 and my youngest employee was 16. And it was in a retail environment where it was customer service for a shopping center. And of course, it was great because the 16-year-old knew all the stores that would be conducive to people her age and where to find them. And the 78-year-old was more knowledgeable on some of the stores that people in her generation might be interested in. In addition, the 78-year-old had the best, the most professional phone etiquette that you would ever hear because she used to be a travel agent for a VIP travel agency. So she worked with Fortune 500 companies. You can imagine that the 16-year-old was a little more hesitant using the phone because that generation, as we all know, if you have kids or if you have nieces or if you have grandkids, might not be that comfortable with using the phone because they grew up not using the phone. They grew up with the technological, the texting, the social media and all of that. Well, we did a cross mentorship, right? So the 78-year-old can mentor the 16-year-old on using professional phone etiquette. So she became comfortable, and vice versa. The 16-year-old was able to mentor the 78-year-old on uses of the computer. Now, these were just specific examples. I'm not trying to pigeonhole or stereotype, but this is just what evolved. right? There's always going to be something that the different generations can teach each other on because of when they grew up. Oh, great, Anna, 2 hour window. Okay, perfect. So what do the next generations want in the workforce in 2024 that us as leaders can be prepared for in that we're better communicators? And today's workforce has shown that they want coaches, not bosses. They want to be shown how to do something. They don't want to be told what to do, right? They want clear expectations of what is expected of them to do on the job. And this is from Gallup. And if you're familiar with Gallup, they do a Q12 survey that identifies what top employees who are really engaged on the job, what they do, what they need to have. And one of them that is listed is clear expectations. And even though they might have gone through the interview process and you thought you were being clear about what the expectations are, or you had the job description, most people will quit a job within 6 months if the expectations of the job that were mentioned in the interview don't match up with the reality, right? So you need to be clear, even from the interview process, what are the clear expectations of the job? The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? You might need to work more hours. You might need to work weekends. Is this what you want, right? Really setting those clear expectations. We might need to cross-train you on customer service. All of these things, so it isn't a shock. Again, being transparent, being honest about what the job really involves. Also, employees want accountability. They want to be held accountable and they want their leaders to be accountable. In other words, walking the walk, talking the talk. They want a purpose. And sometimes I get a little bit of pushback on, well, gosh, Keisha, you know, we're in manufacturing. Most of our employees work online. How can I provide a purpose, a rich purpose? And purpose can simply mean I know that when I go to the work, I'm doing something that contributes to the overall success of the company. And the way I know that is because my company, my manager, my leaders communicate that to me. They value me. They give me good feedback, constructive feedback that what I do really makes a difference. So that can give anybody a purpose to their job, right? And speaking of that, they want ongoing feedback, right? They want to know that what they're doing is they're doing it well, or that they have areas to improve and what can they improve on together so that you can create some goals. And this is really important to our employees because only 2 in 10 say their performance is managed in a way that motivates them to do excellent work. So it's the how, right? When we're giving that feedback, we're communicating, and it's our tone and it's how our body language is showing. And it's not a surprise because we should be doing that all along the way, right? When you're giving any kind of feedback to employees, it shouldn't be a shock or a surprise to them. It should be something that you're already detailing from the very beginning. Some other red flags to keep out for, and that's why I say red flags, is if you start noticing any gossip, any people using hurtful statements about each other, any inappropriate humor. We all want a foundation of respect within our companies, and it is our responsibility as leaders to set the example, to set the tone. So you start hearing little gossip or rumors about things, or people not listening respectfully, and we're all guilty of that. Disrespectful listening is really just not paying attention, not actively listening, multitasking, right? Not really focusing in on what the employee says. And as a leader, if your employee is bringing something to your attention that may be a concern or an issue, they've probably been thinking about it for a while. So then when they bring it to your attention, you really want to be there. You really want to be present. So that's one of the areas. And then fault finding and doing so in a negative manner, that just results in the blame game, right? And we don't want to be a work environment of blaming each other. We want to be a work environment where we're really trying to solve the problem and we see the issue or concern as an opportunity to find the solution, right? So we work on the issue, not the person. And then it's really underestimated how impactful it can be to criticize or mock people in front of others. And that same retail environment I mentioned earlier, the general manager of that environment would have weekly staff meetings with all the departments and intentionally call somebody out on what they had done wrong. So it wasn't very productive. It wasn't very inclusive. People weren't really throwing out ideas or innovative ways of doing things. In fact, we would actually gather outside of those staff meetings and kind of recap on what had occurred. Not to mention that it was really humiliating for the person who had been called out, right? So it wasn't conducive, wasn't productive. So we want to keep those in mind. If you see any of these things happening, it's a red flag that something needs to be addressed, that something's going on. Or if you have extremely quiet meetings where nobody's talking, nobody's speaking up, it means they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel safe in that environment. There are people who don't feel safe. Just that's their communication style in large groups of people. So finding other ways to get ideas and get questions answered from those employees is really important too, right? We're not all the same. So we brought in multiple ways of communicating now. We thought, gosh, this is supposed to be easier, right? All these multiple communication channels. But sometimes we actually have more problems because we have that less face-to-face time that you all mentioned. And we can't pick up on those nonverbal communication cues. Just like right now as a facilitator, when I can see you live and in person, I can pick up on whether you're nodding, whether you're resonating with the information that I'm sharing, or whether you're tired and you're nodding off and I need to switch things around and pick things up a little bit. So we rely as humans on that nonverbal communication cues. As a communicator, when we have that, it should be aligned with our message, right? So if we're giving a really positive message, but we sound down and depressed, people are going to pick up on the tone and not the message itself, not the words themselves. So we want to be aware of our own nonverbal communication cues when we have that. As a result of all this communication channels and all of the notifications and pings that we get, we tend to have shorter attention spans. So not good for those of us who are longer talkers, that it takes a while for us to get to a point, even if it's written communication, right? Because many of us are just skimming the email, and maybe that's where some of the misunderstanding is coming in. So really working on making that message clear and concise, getting the bullet points for some. And if someone wants additional information, maybe you pick up the phone or maybe you schedule a meeting. But because we're so used to now just responding so fast, we're trying to emulate computers. But guess what? We're not computers yet, people. We're human beings. So we need to sometimes take a moment and stop and pause to really process what the communication is being. And yes, we can get information overload, especially if you are going into so many meetings and you're not actually getting the time to actually do your work. So this is from a book called How the Future Works, and they talk about meeting expectations. And one thing that we've seen is employers are starting to implement no meeting days. So it could be no meeting Monday or no meeting Friday, which allows people to actually do that work that they really need to get done. When you have meetings, what they expect is this is a meeting for us to discuss something, to debate something, decide something, develop a new project. So keep those in mind. And when possible, one of the recommendations is to create and send an agenda 24 hours at least prior to the meeting, right? What this does, it gives people a focus, and it also gives them an opportunity to maybe think of some speaking points themselves. Have you ever been in that meeting where you're caught off guard and they say, "What do you think, Keisha?" And you're like, "Oh gosh, I don't know. I haven't really been thinking about this." But if I had that agenda in advance, maybe I could think of some ideas or some questions that I might have concerns about to present in that meeting itself. Also, we can't be 12 places in 12 places at the same time, right? So sometimes we're not available for that meeting, but maybe something really important happened or was said. So taking notes or designating someone to take notes and then sharing them with the team is always important, especially if you have certain departments that might not have been in that meeting, but it applies to them. Or if you have two or more others invited to a meeting internally from the same department and you're overwhelmed, you're trying to get a project done, have the availability to be able to decline that meeting, right? Do we have to be in that meeting if two of my colleagues are already going or attending? So we can strategize that way. And then making sure we keep the meeting on track. There's always going to be people who want to bring some other elements into the meeting, but if we only have a limited amount of time, we can put that into another meeting. We can put it in the parking lot, as some people say. We can talk about it offline, but really having someone keep that meeting on track, right? There's that meme that has been going around that says, this could have been an email, right? So making sure that you do have a specific purpose for all those meetings that people are attending. And again, we want that human connection. So making time at the beginning of the meeting for people to have a little chit chat, have an icebreaker or an ice melter to get things going, right? Sometimes we're in so many meetings that people aren't even saying hello to each other anymore. They're not asking each other how they are. So setting some time at the initial stages of the meeting so that people feel more relaxed, so they don't feel as rushed in the meeting. Those are some of my suggestions. If you have any others, because this really is the bane of many people's existence, is having all of those meetings, and a couple of you, I think, mentioned that. So we've talked to, up until this time, we've talked a little bit about how we can address certain situations in the workplace with communication, but also we want to work on our own communication. So what communication skills do you really want to improve? And it can be all of them, and you don't need to put it in the chat if you don't want to. This is just kind of a self-reflection, because it really does make an impact when we all make an effort to improve in certain areas. And we'll touch a little bit on each of these today, but just try and just think about which ones are most important for me right now. And they might also, again, seep into your personal lives. So do you need to be a better listener right now? Do you need to make time to provide that feedback to a certain team member? Are you avoiding conflict right now? What are some areas that you think you could improve upon? And it's okay if it's all of them, because we probably all can improve in all of these areas. And you're not alone when you're saying having those difficult conversations, because again, depending on how we grew up, how we were raised, and the lack of training we might have gotten, it can be very uncomfortable to have those difficult conversations. And we'll touch a little bit on that a little bit more. And we do, of course, have a whole different training on that. But let's start with listening. Why do you think listening is so hard in today's age? Throw out some answers. Dun, dun. Yeah, going back to the short attention span, we are just distracted by so many things. Multitasking, absolutely. Yeah, too much on our plate, right? When someone comes to us, we're still thinking about everything we have to do, or we're trying to do it at the same time. And again, that does kind of go back to trying to emulate a computer. And that's really when the term multitasking came about. The multitasking was intended for computers, not human beings. And research is showing that we really are limited in how much we can multitask. Yes, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. The less cognitive abilities we need, we can do that. But the more cognitive abilities that we need in order to do those tasks, we really need to focus on, right? So if it has a high cognitive level, doing a report, creating a presentation, right? Thinking of a solution, critical thinking, we probably just need to focus on that one thing. And the same thing goes for listening. That requires all of our attention and presence to be able to really understand and receive the message that's being communicated to us. And here's just some reasons why listening is hard to do. And this is the number one is based mostly on our culture in the United States. Our natural desire is to talk, and kind of been ingrained in our education system in showing that when we want to talk is we want to share, and it's really important for us to share what we know and share our knowledge. So when someone's talking to us, we'll be thinking, okay, what do I know about that? What can I throw in there? What can I interject? Rather than just really fully being present and listening to what the other person is sharing, because they have knowledge that they're sharing. The next two is just having those preconceptions about people and biases. Those can show up when we know people, right? Maybe we've worked with people for a long time and we say, oh my gosh, I know what Sabrina's going to say because I've just known her for so long, so I'm just going to tune out here. But we really need to pay attention because maybe Sabrina's going to surprise us with what she has to say. So really trying to eliminate those preconceptions and biases. And so maybe we judge people because we don't know them well. So we make assumptions about them without really giving them the opportunity to present who they really are as people. Sometimes our egos get in the way. If someone has a different opinion, then we'll tune them out. Again, we're trying to multitask. We shut people down again if we disagree or if we don't like what they're saying. And then again, maybe we've been talking to so many employees, depending on your role. If you do work with clients or you're in customer service, you might have been dealing with so many people in so many different situations. At the end of the day, your brain is done, right? You can't take anything else. And again, so that does kind of refer to us, how do we manage our time so that we can be listening, so that we can be attentive to people, right? Because it's so important and it impacts people so much. So really, it's important to listen as a leader because that's where we're getting the really good information and knowledge from people. What's going wrong? What's going right? Are there any issues? Are there any barriers? Are you overloaded? How can I support you? Right? It really helps us understand other people. We can identify what issues are going on, what they're doing well. And when you become a good listener, if you already are a good listener, people usually come to you because they have observed that in yourself. So they're more likely to come to you and confide in you about issues or concerns. And as leaders, we want that because we want to be able to help solve problems and get to the solution. So once people determine that you are a good listener, then your influence is really expands and increases, right? Also, it helps transmit respect, display empathy, build that trust, right? And listening with the intent to really understand what that person is saying is so important. And we have multiple levels of listening. We've all been guilty of ignoring people, of selective listening, only listening to what we agree with or want to hear, pretending because we're still really multitasking. And I'm sure some of you are multitasking right now. Not going to call you out, but we think we can multitask. So we're only hearing part of it. Those are really focused on, and even attentive. Attentive is looking out for those things that I agree with and deciding how I'm going to respond, right? So the first four are really focused on ourselves. When we're empathic or empathetic listeners, we're really focusing on the other person. We're really giving our full attention so that we really can discern what the issue is or what they're trying to share with us. So some tips for active listening: just asking questions, right? Giving our full attention, really turning those notifications and pings off. You really can do that. It is really possible. Being present and being okay with the silence. Again, we do tend to want to fill in the gaps when there's silence in a conversation, but sometimes somebody has been asked a question and they really need the time to think and process what their answer or response is going to be. So giving them the time to do that. And then when we are able to be face-to-face, being aware of our own nonverbal communication. And as I said earlier, our message needs to align with what we're saying with our body language. If it's not in alignment, then there's something wrong, right? And that's going to trigger someone else to say, gosh, something's not right with this person. So things we can do is smile, right? Just put the person at ease. Really watch our tone. Are we escalating? Are we being really aggressive with our tone? Our posture, our eye contact, facial expressions can really reveal a lot. And be engaged, right? When I have a conversation face-to-face with person, what vibes am I giving that person? And that really comes to knowing what isn't said, right? We really tell a lot by someone's nonverbal communication. And then when we're communicating, we don't really take the time to consider what style we're using or what type we're practicing, but knowing that can really be beneficial towards being a more effective communicator. So there's passive. I'll go over these briefly, but passive is that person who really isn't speaking up for themselves. They're really not interjecting their opinions or ideas. They're feeling like if they do, nothing's really going to be done. So they just are more likely not to stand up for themselves, which can really impact a workplace because, again, we might have that perception that that person who doesn't talk isn't really contributing to the overall success of the team. So we may perceive that, we may make a judgment, but we really have to ask the person, right? Maybe there's a certain reason why they're being passive at that time. So really, again, asking those questions, having those one-on-ones can determine what's going on. You know, maybe something happened that has impacted them to be more passive, and they used to be more outgoing and speak up more. We're all familiar with aggressive. That's that person that comes on strong. They're very commanding, my way or the highway. And that can be very isolating and intimidating to others. You're not going to get a lot of input from people and a lot of, again, innovation, collaboration. Passive aggressive is that person who's kind of being aggressive behind the scenes. They're manipulating things, trying to get their way, again, in a manipulative way. So it's like you lose, the person loses. And then there's assertive, where it's I am confident in speaking my mind and standing up for myself, but I also allow others to give their own perspectives and own ideas and ways of thinking. And that's what great leaders embrace, is the assertive style, because they know that they can become effective leaders by using that communicative style. So some of the characteristics are they connect and communicate with everyone, not only the members of their team, but everyone in the organization, right? Everybody has value. So saying hi, asking people how their day was, no matter where they are on the hierarchy, on the team, really allows people to build that trust and build relationships with people. Giving honest feedback in a helpful way, using good judgment, and really just collaborating with others, really making it known that I really value your opinions and I want to hear them. And then, as we said earlier, employees want feedback, and we're familiar with negative and positive feedback. And many times we do provide that in our performance reviews. But there's also something called negative feed forward and positive feed forward, this is from a book called Buds to Bosses. So if you are a new manager who now oversees people who used to be peers and colleagues with, this is a great recommendation. But one thing that the author suggests is focusing more on what you can do in the future, right? The past is the past, but with negative feed forward, yes, maybe we're talking to someone about being late to work. You've been late to work. We know we're not going to do that. How can I support you in the future? Is there something I need to know, or is there something that we can work on together to make sure that you arrive to work on time? And then also positive feed forward. You're doing great on this. Do you want to take some additional responsibilities in this area? Is this something that you enjoy? And we can create some goals together on that. But we know some employers don't even provide feedback to their employees. And it really makes a difference. If I get feedback, that ongoing feedback, it shows that my manager or leader really is paying attention. They're observing my work and pointing out some guidance, being a coach, more of a coach than just a boss. And these are just some ways. I'm not going to go over all of them because you have them in your handouts. But creating that safe environment when you are giving feedback, because we're all humans, we all have egos, right? So we want it to be constructive. It's a gift to give feedback, but you want the gift nicely wrapped, right? You don't want to just go in there and give the negative feedback because that's going to be a shock to the system. So you want to provide the positive feedback and the negative feed forward in a positive way, in a nice tone, so that the person will really receive that information. And then all of that feedback can be helped with leading with emotional intelligence. And if you're not familiar with emotional intelligence, it's similar to IQ in terms of you have that within you, but you can always improve it, whereas your IQ kind of stagnates when we're in our early 20s. So there's 4 components of it: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And it's really the heart of it is managing my emotions, knowing who I am, how am I perceived, how do I manage my own time, and how do I manage myself, and how am I aware of other people? Can I read the room? when it shifts to respectful to disrespectful, how do I manage my relationships? Am I communicating well? Am I aggressive? Am I assertive? Am I passive aggressive? And knowing when those impact my work environment. What are my triggers? Because we've all had instances where our emotions can work against us. And it used to be said where you can't bring your emotions into work, but emotions do come in because we're human beings. And we've seen that happen. So how can your emotions work against you? We've all had those triggers where maybe we said or did something where we later regretted. Maybe our inability to understand caused someone anxiety or led to that breakdown in communication. So really working on our emotional intelligence and being self-aware can help us manage those areas. So really self-awareness is, again, recognizing my own emotions. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? And how is that impacting the behavior on others? And it's so important for leaders because, again, leaders set the tone, right? You set the example. You are the model. So if other people see that behavior, they think, okay, this is how so-and-so is communicating. This is how I can communicate. And that might not necessarily be how you want people to communicate, right? So we really do set the tone. So the more we can be emotionally intelligent, the more we can manage our own emotions and handle things better. When we have a lack of emotional intelligence, then things start to spiral, right? Then we don't address those difficult conversations, and those can get worse. Then we're not handling the conversations well. Those can get worse, right? But leaders who have high emotional intelligence are better able to address problems and handle the conflicts as soon as they arise, which, coming from an HR perspective, we always want you to be able to address those problems as soon as they come up, right? Because if they're swept under the rug, they're just going to get worse and worse. Also, when you have high emotional intelligence, you are in a position to be able to oversee and know your teams so that you're able to better inspire and motivate them. You know what motivates them. You ask them what motivates them. You ask them how you can support them and how you can help them utilize their strengths to do their best job. Because the majority of people want to do their best work. Leaders, and we also term emotional intelligence as EQ, similar to IQ, really when they use their EQ to develop a more effective workplace. And it's really the initial stage is, how do I communicate to my employees? How can I be an effective leader with my communication? Because it's a huge responsibility. It's a huge part of our job. So emotional intelligence and conflict, it's okay to disagree. It's not okay to disrespect, right? We want healthy debate. We want different ideas and different perspectives, but we don't want to use it with swearing at people, with getting too emotional. We want to be able to handle it in a neutral way where I see that person's perspective. So as I said, it's really focusing on the issue, not the person, right? What is our common ground that we can see? So we may agree to disagree, but we're going to try and find common ground, right? Even if it's two employees who don't get along, what is our outcome? What is our goal? It's to be able to at least work together, to collaborate together for the overall success of the team and the company. When we are agreeing to disagree, though, we want to make sure that other people are seen and heard. We want to make sure people are articulating their feelings clearly. We're staying focused on the issue at hand and not veering into other areas or other issues that are being brought up. And sometimes things are going to get heated. And when they do, it's okay to take a pause and say, gosh, we're not getting anywhere right now. Let's come back either today or tomorrow or in a few days, right? Sometimes people need some time to cool off. So as we come to the end, because we are at the end, I know there's a lot to cover. We like to provide a lot of information to you in this 1 hour, but things we have already talked about. How do top leaders communicate? Again, they're authentic and transparent. They're active listeners. That's where you really find the golden nuggets of information from your employees. They ask good questions. They not only know their audience when they're communicating, but they know themselves. And they're providing feedback and receiving feedback on an ongoing basis. And you may have an annual performance review, but you have informal ways to communicate on a regular basis. And they encourage input, either through climate surveys or just having team meetings where you create that safe environment where people really can ask questions and address any concerns that they may have. So moving forward, what is one thing that you will take action on starting today to better communicate as a leader? That is what I'm going to leave you with. It has been a pleasure. And I know our time is of the essence, so I will turn it back to Anna to tell you about your HRCI codes.
Oh, it'd be better if I tried to communicate while not being on mute, right? One of the barriers to communication there is being on mute. Okay, my friends, I'm putting the HRCI codes in the chat as well in case that is better accessible for you, but your HRCI code 657493, SHRM code 24-64GD3. If you have any problems with those at all, please email us, ceainfo@employers.org. We are more than happy to get that sorted out for you. As you see on the screen now, we do have the QR code for that survey. I promise it's 5 questions, less than 2 minutes. I'm also going to drop a hyperlink into the chat. And speaking of hyperlinks, last one little thing I want you to pay attention to. A couple lines up, I did drop a link to our next free training, thanks to Ventura County. So that is happening on March 19th. This is going to be a compliance one. It's a little bit of a topic switch, but equally as important. So it's going to be the 2024 wage and hour update. That's coming up on March 19th. And that, again, is free to you, sponsored by the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County. So again, thank you to Rebecca, Cynthia, and their entire team for working so hard to bring trainings like this, as well as their entire suite of resources to employers like yourself. Invite your friends to the next training on March 19th. Please fill out your surveys, and we look forward to seeing you at the next training. Thank you all for joining us live. Thank you, Keisha, for your expertise and your time. And we'll see you soon, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you. Have a great day.